want you to look at it and just feel what I felt many, many years ago. So enjoy the read, and hopefully, I will see you in the not too distant future. And don't forget, you'll never walk alone.
Premier League legends say Alan Kennedy was terrifying. But here's the twist. He didn't scare the other teams. He scared his own teammates. Alan Kennedy joined Liverpool in 1978 and walked into a nightmare. The dressing room at Anfield wasn't friendly. It was brutal. And Kennedy was about to find out just how brutal it could be. Liverpool had just won the European Cup. They didn't need saving. They needed soldiers who could handle the pressure. Kennedy arrived from Newcastle for $330,000. That was a British record for a fullback. But the price tag didn't protect him. Not even close. The moment he stepped into that dressing room, he was marked. He called himself a dreamer. That was a problem, because Liverpool's dressing room had no space for dreamers. Bob Paisley ran Liverpool like a machine. Bill Shankly had built the club on passion. Paisley kept it running on fear. If you showed weakness, you were out. Simple as that. Kennedy wasn't prepared for this. He admitted it himself. He said coming to Liverpool was very difficult. He hadn't learned much about football yet. That's a terrible thing to admit when you're surrounded by men who had already conquered Europe. The hierarchy was set in stone. Ray Kennedy, Graham Souness, and Jimmy Case ruled the dressing room. These weren't friendly faces. They were intimidating characters. Alan Kennedy said so himself. They were internationals. They had medals. Alan had none of that. He was the new kid trying to survive in a shark tank. His first game was a disaster. Liverpool played Queen's Park Rangers. Kennedy was nervous. His passes went astray. His positioning was all wrong. After the match, he sat slumped in the Anfield dressing room. He waited for someone to tell him it would be okay. Nobody did. Instead, Bob Paisley made a joke that cut deep. He said they shot the wrong Kennedy. It was a reference to President John F. Kennedy's assassination. Dark humour. Typical of the boot room. But for Alan, it was devastating. His own manager had just called him a mistake. That comment set the tone for everything that followed. Alan Kennedy spent his entire Liverpool career one mistake away from being sold. He knew it. The fans knew it. And his teammates definitely knew it. The pressure didn't ease after that first match. It got worse. Paisley's comments spread through the squad like poison. Players heard about it. Some laughed. Others used it as ammunition. When Alan made mistakes in training, someone would reference it. The wrong Kennedy. It became a running joke. But jokes in that dressing room had teeth. They drew blood. Alan had to prove himself every single day. There were no days off, no moments to relax. Every training session was a test. Every match was an audition. He couldn't afford one bad performance because the vultures were circling. Other players wanted his spot. The coaching staff were watching for any sign of weakness. And Bob Paisley never gave reassurance. That wasn't his style. The psychological warfare was constant. Paisley would drop players without explanation. He'd bring them back without a word. It kept everyone on edge. Alan never knew if he'd be playing until the team sheet went up. That uncertainty gnawed at him. Some players thrived under that pressure. They used it as motivation. But for Alan, it was exhausting. He was always looking over his shoulder, always wondering if today would be the day they decided he wasn't good enough. The boot room operated on cold logic. Sentiment meant nothing. Past achievements meant nothing. You were only as good as your last performance. That mentality created champions, but it also created casualties. Players who couldn't handle the mental strain. Alan Kennedy came dangerously close to being one of those casualties. Multiple times. Ray Kennedy was Alan's biggest problem. They played on the left side together. Ray in midfield, Alan at left back. On paper, it should have worked. In reality, it was a disaster. Ray Kennedy was a converted striker. He had vision, touch, and power. He saw himself as an artist, a footballer of the highest level. Alan Kennedy? Ray saw him as a liability. Ray said Alan had no nerves and not much brain. He told people they didn't gel on the pitch. That's harsh, but it gets worse. Ray used to tell everyone he was the intelligent one. He made sure people knew the difference between him and Alan. Ray was the thinker. Alan was the worker. That's how Ray saw it. The worst quote came later. Ray told Alan directly that he took 5 years off his career. 5 years. That's how much Ray resented playing with him. Why? Because Alan's style drove Ray mad. Ray wanted the ball to his feet. He wanted control. He didn't want to run. Running was for defenders. Ray believed defenders should just defend, but Alan didn't agree. Alan wanted to attack. Every chance he got, he bombed forward. That left gaps, big gaps, and Ray had to cover them. Ray was already dealing with the early stages of Parkinson's disease. Nobody knew it at the time, but his body was slowing down. He relied on reading the game to save energy. When Alan charged up the field and lost the ball, Ray had to sprint back. That physical effort infuriated him. Alan admitted Ray wasn't keen on defensive duties. Alan used every opportunity to attack. His passes went astray. That annoyed Ray greatly. The communication between them broke down completely. Alan confessed that the easiest pass became the hardest for him. The short pass to Ray terrified him. Why? Because Ray would criticize him if it wasn't perfect. So Alan panicked. Instead of playing it simple, he'd hit a 60-yard pass into the opponent's box. That made no tactical sense, but it was safer emotionally. Alan feared Ray's ego and stubborn personality so much that he changed his entire game to avoid interaction. Think about that. Alan Kennedy was so intimidated by his own teammate that he chose to give the ball away rather than pass it safely. That's not just bad tactics. That's psychological terror. The tactical confusion this created was massive. Liverpool played with patterns. Everyone knew where everyone else would be, except with Alan Kennedy. He broke every pattern. When Ray expected support, Alan was 50 yards upfield. When Ray wanted an outlet pass, Alan was nowhere to be found. It disrupted the entire left side. Other teams noticed. They exploited the confusion. But Liverpool kept winning anyway. That made Ray even angrier, because it proved Alan's chaos worked. Even if it shouldn't have, Graham Souness made Ray Kennedy look friendly. Souness was the captain, the enforcer, the emperor of the midfield. Alan listed him as one of the intimidating characters who made life very difficult. Souness didn't just demand high standards, he enforced them with violence. In the dressing room, teacups and punches were thrown. Souness had very frank exchanges, even with close friends like Kenny Dalglish. If he'd argue with Dalglish, imagine what he'd do to Alan Kennedy. For someone prone to errors, Souness's presence was constant dread. Every mistake meant facing Souness's wrath, and Souness didn't just intimidate his own team, he put them in danger too. The 1984 European Cup semi-final against Dinamo Bucharest proved it. In the first leg at Anfield, Souness punched the Dinamo captain. He broke his jaw. The referee missed it. Souness got away with it, but that meant the return leg in Romania would be hell, and it was. Mark Lawrenson said it was 10 times scarier than the final in Rome. He said they wanted to kill Souness over there. They wanted to kill all of them. Alan Kennedy had to play in that match. The crowd wanted blood. The opposition wanted revenge, all because Souness had punched someone and walked away unpunished. The terror was real, physical danger in a hostile communist state, and it was caused by their own captain's brutality. Jimmy Case was different. He didn't shout like Souness. He didn't need to. Case terrified through aura alone. He was hard as nails. His shot could break nets. Alan said Case was scary to someone who didn't know him. New players were afraid to speak around him. Case had this intensity that made everyone nervous. Off the pitch, Case and Ray Kennedy were close. They were the bad boys. They got into fines, court appearances, and jail together. They formed a clique, a dangerous, rebellious clique. Alan wasn't part of it. He was the outsider, the dreamer trying to navigate a social minefield controlled by volatile men. Before Alan faced the judgment of his teammates, he had to survive the fans. He replaced Joey Jones. That was a massive problem. Joey Jones was a cult hero. He wasn't the most technical player, but he gave everything. He ran through walls. He pumped his fists. The cop loved him. Jones had been part of the 1977 European Cup winning team. Then Liverpool allowed him to return to Wrexham for just 20,000 Hanslers. The fans were baffled. Why replace a hero with an expensive import from Newcastle? The fans gave Alan a nickname, Barney Rubble, after the Flintstones character. It started as mockery. Alan ran with his head down and his arms pumping. He looked ungainly, clumsy, like a cartoon caveman. Alan admitted the cop thought he looked like Barney when he ran. To replace Joey Jones and immediately become a joke was crushing. Every mistake was amplified. Every wayward pass confirmed what the fans already thought. He was the clown in a team of champions. The fear of becoming a laughingstock in front of 50,000 people was constant. Joey Jones had been sold for nothing because Allen arrived. That ruthlessness sent a clear message. If they could discard a European Cup winner for £20,000, Allen was just as expendable. In 1981, Liverpool bought Mark Lawrenson for £900,000, a club record. Lawrenson was everything Allen wasn't: graceful, composed, tactically disciplined. He was younger, more technical. Liverpool initially played him at left-back, Allen's position. The message was obvious. Allen was being replaced again. The script seemed written. The clumsy Barney Rubble would be phased out for the elegant Lawrenson, but Allen fought back. He forced his way back into the team. How? By using the very chaos that Ray Kennedy hated. Bob Paisley realised something. Lawrenson was the better defender, but Allen offered something else, an attacking dimension that was impossible to predict. Alan Hansen said that was the beauty of playing with Allen. You never knew where he was going to be. That unpredictability became an asset. By reclaiming his spot, Allen forced Lawrenson to move to centre-back. It was a battle for survival, and somehow the dreamer won. Here's the great irony. The traits that terrified his teammates became weapons against opponents. Teams looked at Liverpool's defence and identified Alan Kennedy as the weak link. Compared to Phil Neal, Alan Hansen and Mark Lawrenson, Kennedy looked vulnerable, so teams targeted his flank. They left him unmarked during attacks. Big mistake. The 1981 European Cup final in Paris proved it. Liverpool faced Real Madrid. Ray Kennedy took a throw-in on the left. Allen ignored all defensive protocol and surged into the box. The Real Madrid defender, Cortez, made an indifferent challenge. He was confused by the sudden arrival of the left-back. Allen shot. For one awful moment, he thought he'd miskicked it, but when he looked up, he saw it rocket into the net. Liverpool won 1-0. The goal came from pure chaos. A defender doing what no sensible defender would do. Real Madrid never saw it coming. 3 years later, Allen did it again. The 1984 European Cup final in Rome. Liverpool faced AS Roma in their own stadium. The atmosphere was a cauldron of noise and hostility. The match went to penalties. The hard men had already taken theirs. Souness had gone. Now it came down to Alan Kennedy, the dreamer, the man Ray Kennedy called brainless. Alan's penalty record was terrible. They'd practiced penalties the week before. He said they were absolutely abysmal. How Joe Fagan picked him, nobody knows. But he did. Alan walked up to take the final penalty. A player who overthought might have crumbled, but Alan didn't overthink. That was his strength. He was the dreamer. He just walked up and scored. The player who couldn't pass short to Ray Kennedy had passed the ball into the net from 12 yards. He'd won the European Cup. He'd terrified the Roma fans into silence. Over time, the mockery turned to mythology. The Barney Rubble chant became a roar of love. Mark Lawrenson now talks about the elite nature of that team. He acknowledges Alan's role. Graham Souness praises Alan's penalty in Rome. He says Alan kept his cool admirably. These are the same men who once intimidated him, the same men who made his life difficult. In 2022, Alan attended the Champions League final in Paris. Liverpool versus Real Madrid again, but this time the terror was different. The crowd management outside the stadium was a disaster. Alan was funneled into dangerous crushes. Police used tear gas. He called it the most frightening experience he'd ever had in a football stadium. Physical danger at an age when he should have been safe. It was a grim bookend to his relationship with European finals. From glory in 1981 and 1984 to genuine life-threatening terror in 2022, Alan Kennedy survived at Liverpool by refusing to make sense. In a dressing room of calculated winners, he was the unpredictable one. Ray Kennedy resented him for disrupting order. Mark Lawrenson couldn't understand how he kept his place. Souness and Case intimidated him daily. Bob Paisley tested him from day one. The fans mocked him as Barney Rubble. But when it mattered most, Alan Kennedy was the man standing over the ball. Twice, 2 European Cup finals, 2 winning contributions. The chaos that terrified his teammates became the weapon that decided history. He was hated internally, but feared externally. And in the end, that made him a legend.